For all those watching us today, thanks a lot for being here. And firstly, again, thanks a lot, Rahul, for joining us today, for being brave enough to be the first speaker in this virtual lecture series that we have started. And it's definitely one of those times where we would want to stay connected to our roots. And what I mean by that is going back to where we've started our learning from. And I think given the times of self-isolation and staying at home, disconnected from people, and just being connected through the rays of social media, I think it's great. It's a great opportunity for us to keep learning, and this is where Mindsperm steps in. And for us, it's all about going beyond the four walls of a classroom, and staying connected to our faculty, to professors, to people who can and will have an impact in our lives. And moving forward, we would want to make this a one-stop platform where we come for good, knowledgeable insights, discussions with leaders in their own fields. So starting with today's talk, which would be on desires and uh, during the time of a pandemic. I think we can have Nikunj start off and introduce Rahul first, and then from there you can take it.
Yep, sure. Hi everybody. I am Nikunj, and I'll be your moderator for the evening. And as I think Ayush has already given the reason as to why we are doing this entire series of lectures. So today we have Rahul with us. Rahul has graciously agreed to kickstart the entire lecture series for us, and we are extremely thankful, Rahul. Just to give you all a quick intro about Rahul. So Rahul is an MPhil literature from DU, and he currently is a critical writing preceptor at Ashoka University. Of course, he focuses on themes around gender studies, feminism, sexuality, queer theory, and such. And today's talk is around desires in the times of Corona, very relevant for each one of us. And of course, Rahul has very appropriately decided to call the talk Virus Scares and Viral Desires. So over to you, Rahul, with this.
Thank you very much, Nikunj. Thank you very much, Team Mindsperm, for inviting me for this. I'm really grateful. And I mean, what I find very, very significant is that so much that is happening around us is centered around ideas of pleasure, ideas of desire, ideas of intimacies. But in the daily conversations around COVID-19, in the daily conversations around Corona, we are hardly addressing those. I mean, we are maybe in small pockets here and there, but not so much in a concerted way. So what I thought I would be doing today is try to address notions of intimacies, notions of desires, which are certainly related to ideas of the pandemic, which we are living in at the moment, but also which transcend the immediate context. So what I would do is, my talk is divided in two parts. One immediately relates to the context that is at hand, and that is, what is the pandemic doing to our expressions of intimacies, our experiences of intimacies, our ability to negotiate with desire, attraction, libido, horniness, all of that. And on the other hand, the second part of the talk would kind of transcend the immediate context. And it will try to address things like the nature of desire itself, and how can desire speak back to notions of disease, notions of illness, notions of restrictions, prohibitions, and all of that. So I'm going to share uh, uh, my screen with you, which is a PPT. And you can see it here, that I have titled my talk as Virus Scares and Viral Desires. And what I would try to do by the end of the talk is collapse the distinction between all of these different words that are there. So scare, uh, or rather scariness, virus, viral, desire, and all of that. So now the one obvious question that might come at this particular juncture is, why think about intimacy at all? Why think about sexuality at all at a time when so many people are dying around us? At a time where people are starving, at a time where migrant laborers are stuck, at a time where the virus is used as an excuse to fuel Islamophobia, at a time where racist attacks are mounting in the country in different parts, particularly around Northeast. So when there are so many grave and far more serious events happening, why should we think about desire? Why should we think about pleasure, so to speak? Uh, isn't it selfish? Isn't it self-centered? And all of that. Now, to address it, I have, or the way I would like to address it is to refer to a quote by Gail Rubin, which is this. And this is from one of Rubin's very early essays, which was published in 1984. And the essay was called Thinking Sex, Notes for a Radical Theory of the Politics of Sexuality. So what Rubin is doing here is talking about the urgency to speak about sexuality. So these are the opening lines of that particular essay, and I've just selected a few lines, few sentences for you to take a look at. To some, sexuality may seem to be an unimportant topic, a frivolous diversion from the more critical problems of poverty, war, disease, racism, famine, or nuclear annihilation. It is precisely at times such as these, when we live with the possibility of unthinkable destruction, that people are likely to become dangerously crazy about sexuality. So Rubin's central point is that it is not that we think about sexuality at these moments, but it's precisely at these moments where we need to think about sexuality. So the question should not be why we should think about sexuality or desire in times of pandemics or in times of the current pandemic, but it's precisely in times of the current pandemic that we must most importantly and poignantly think about desire. Now, you can see the word that I highlighted or bolded here is the word disease, which is very significant because I don't know what was going on in in Rubin's mind. Uh, Apart from the fact that she was responding to the AIDS epidemic crisis, which was another virus. But the word disease is actually very crucial to our context or where we are today. And the engagement with disease is actually not that far removed from romance. The engagement with disease is not far removed from intimacy or pleasure or desire, because I'm just going to show you one cultural icon which I'm sure all of you are familiar with, even if all of you do not like her, is somebody who had talked about that entwinedness between disease and desire, and that is Lady Gaga. So Lady Gaga's Bad Romance has this lines. It would have been great had we watched the video, but we'll not because this is just one thing I wanted to show you. Uh, that she wants the disease of her partner. She wants the ugliness of her partner. She wants the nastiness of her partner. And she wants basically everything as long as it's free. And if you have watched the entire song, if any of you have watched the video, you'll know that it's also an exercise in kink and masochism and sadism and all of that. So I don't want to go much into it, but just one thing I wanted to share at this moment, that the word romance, or if you think of variants of that particular word in terms of intimacy, desire, kind of monogamous or non-monogamous kinship, some form of a close structure, that's inevitably bad for Gaga. And it's almost proleptic. This particular slide is proleptic. Why, you will know by the time we end the last slide. So you'll understand slowly, gradually, once we progress, that why it's bad. Now, before actually moving further, I wanted to think or rather situate this particular context that we are living in the continuum of history. Because there's a lot of fear around, there's a lot of panic around, there's a lot of anxiety and vexation around, that this moment is unprecedented. Once the lockdown is lifted, it will affect the job market. How are we going to live? So many people will lose their livelihoods. And even now, people are dying in all of it. Yes, all of that is true. And I, by no means, am trying to discount or take away your anxieties from you. But all that I'm trying to say here, or will try to say here, is that this moment is by no means unprecedented. Hmm? We have had similar situations before. We have recovered from similar situations before. And there are just so many examples, but I have selected just a few. And I'll tell you why I selected those. Now, first thing we need to do when thinking about a pandemic, or particularly the COVID-19 pandemic, is that I would like to not think of this moment as an exceptional moment, which means that this is not for the first time that we are encountering something like this. We have encountered epidemics before, we have encountered pandemics before, and we have responded to them in various ways. Now, three things that you can see here. The first one is the bubonic plague, or the Black Death, which lasted, as you can see, for more than 20 years. And uh, one of the most, well, iconic is a bad word, but one of the most infamous epidemic that has ever happened in the history of mankind, people say, uh, is the bubonic plague, also known as the Black Death. You can see it caused more than 200 million deaths there. One thing about the bubonic plague or the Black Death is that the dates are 1331 to 1353, but even after 1353, the plague made a resurgence in different parts of the world in small pockets. It was not completely eradicated by 1353. Those of us who have studied literature, we know that how most medieval Renaissance writers were responding to the Black Death. We have Chaucer referring to it. We have Shakespeare referring to it, and also some of other Shakespearean contemporaries, particularly because this was the time when theaters were being shut. So we have a lot of reference of the bubonic plague or the Black Death in literature and literary productions. We have the Spanish flu, which is the other one, and which, although lasted for 2 years, you can see the number of deaths that it had caused within those 2 years, right? Not very far from the COVID-19 virus. And the final one is, to me, most interesting, because this epidemic has by no means ended. Although, yes, it's true that people are not dying in large numbers at a go, but till today we have deaths caused by HIV/AIDS. And apart from these three, there's just so many. For example, the Great Plague of London. You have had the cholera epidemic, the smallpox epidemic in Africa and India, parts of Sri Lanka. So it's by no means that the moment where we are today is unprecedented. It's by no means that the moment where we are today is not something from where we cannot recover. We can. Of course, the social order will change. Of course, things around us will change. But we will adapt ourselves to those. Now, I said that there's a reason for which I selected these three, and that particular reason is that these three particular instances or events of epidemics had a planetary nature to it, in the sense that it originated at a particular place, or maybe we don't even know if it originated there, but that was the epicenter, as we would like to think of it today, and then it spread in different parts of the globe. So that is one of the, and that's the reason why we selected it today, because what we are experiencing with coronavirus is that a lot of it has an impact on borders. So, for example, countries are changing their visa policies, flights are being, suspended. There's a lot of impact on mobility, on migration, and on those things. So it has too, this particular virus too has an idea of, or rather has some impact on planetarity and globality and all of those. Now, what exactly has this virus done? I mean, what is the response by medical professionals, by medical experts to this virus, right? And I mean, this is something we all know. So whatever I'm saying is nothing new, but I'll soon tell you why I'm referring to those. Now, the response to COVID-19, or this is what at least doctors will tell you, is that practice self-isolation, practice social distancing, quarantine yourself, uh, keep at least 1 meter, or I don't know how much, some bizarre numbers, 1.5, some say 2 meter of distance from each other. Wash your hands repeatedly, right? So there's a lot of emphasis on sanitation. There's a lot of emphasis on hygiene. We know that sanitizers were running out of the market, and there was a time. I mean, I was absolutely shocked by it, because the space I stay in Delhi, there were huge line in front of the medicine store just to buy sanitizer. It was absolutely bizarre. That, I mean, it seemed like an absurdist moment to me in the 21st century. So there's a lot of emphasis on sanitation, a lot of emphasis on hygiene, a lot of emphasis on washing hands, changing clothes, all of that, right? Uh, Now, these are the things that you should do. You should wash hand, you should sanitize yourself, you should practice social distancing and all of that. What are the things that you will not do, or what are the things that you're forbidden to do? You're forbidden to touch one another. So you can't handshake. You have to do some kind of a hand gesture of namaste. You are not allowed to even touch your own face or nose or eyes or whatever. You can't hug your friends. You can't hug your beloveds. You can't practice any forms of intimacy that requires mouth to mouth contact, or that requires you to bring your face closer to the other person, right? So as you can see, what this, because, and of course, this is the other side of self isolation, because if isolation is removing separation, then of course you can't hug, you can't touch, you can't be physically intimate or romantically intimate or whatever. Now, what is very striking to me is that the rhetoric of health, or the language or the vocabulary of medicine, is in itself a language of sanitation, is in itself a language of uh, purity. Now, I'm by no means suggesting, and this is something I keep telling people, that I'm by no means suggesting that let's flout all rules of isolation, let's flout all rules for sanitation. No, that is not my point here. My point here is that when we are developing or forging a language of isolation or quarantine or sanitation, then what is it that we are losing out? What is it that gets left out from the language? Hmm? And these are some of the things that get left out from the language. So the shopping malls are shut. The theaters and cinema halls are shut. These are basically all places of public gathering. Restaurants, bars, pubs closed. You cannot procure cigarettes. My father is going mad. I mean, thankfully, I'm not a heavy smoker. It doesn't affect me. But people who are smokers, they are in a bit of a trouble. Liquor shops are closed. Although, actually, in West Bengal, I'm not sure about the other states. The chief minister said that they'll do home delivery of liquor. But thankfully, I mean, again, I'm well stocked for quite a few days. Um, that's one thing that's in a bit of a trouble. Although I don't know how are they going to do that home delivery part, because there's just so many people. And anyway, the last point, and that is the sex work colonies are also sealed. I don't know about the cigarette and the liquor shops in other states, but I'm speaking from my experiences about West Bengal only. The sex work colonies are sealed. Shonagachi, which is the biggest sex work locality in Calcutta, is also shut. In fact, the sex workers are losing their livelihood. There are fundraising drives that are going on, etc., etc. Now, you'll see the point, the reason why I listed this down is that if you look at each one of these components, shopping mall, theater, cinema, restaurant, drinking, smoking, sex, these are all instances of pleasures. These are all instances of entertainment. These are all instances of enjoyment. And precisely these things are being shut. It's precisely these things which are closed, which can't be, I mean, even if you have the money, you can't just eat. Well, you can get food delivered from Swiggy or Zomato, but even there the options are limited, right? So it kind of forbids any kind of transaction or any kind of transactions which are based on entertainment, any kind of trades which are based on entertainment. So it's a moment of anti-pleasure. It's a moment of it's a moment that goes against pleasure, right? Against pursuing of pleasure. So this is what I was saying, that the rhetoric of health or the rhetoric of sanitation or the rhetoric of hygiene unconsciously, unintentionally, inadvertently has now colluded with a conservative mores. Because remember, the conservatives would anyway not like you to go to sex work colony. Although they are the ones who are the first one to go, but that's a separate conversation altogether. The conservatives would not want you to be addicted to liquor. They would want you to live a sane, safe kind of a life. But we are seeing that, therefore, this is a moment which almost seems like, uh, I don't know, I mean, how should I frame it? It almost seems like um, a moment of wet dreams for the right wingers or the conservatives, because they would precisely want you to not do these things, pursue these things. So these are some of the things which this quarantine period or the isolation period has resulted for us. So we can't do any of these, right? What is more significant and what is more bizarre is it that now it's not that people will not get sex. Like, for example, people who stay with their partners, people who are married, they are probably having sex, but this is the trick here. Now the state will also tell you how to have sex. So the Corona Sutra page actually is circulating on social media, on different platforms in social media. And it's actually telling you how to have sex. And you can see, you can't bring your mouth too close, etc., etc. Right? So you can't have sex the way you want. You can have sex now the way the medical fraternity would want you to have. So that is the bizarre, that's the thing about it. But, and herein comes the twist to the story. The twist to the story is this, that desire is anything which can be prohibited. Desire is anything which can be stopped. Desire is anything which can be regulated. Now, I'm very, there are a lot of students of mine here, and they know that I'm extremely fond of Sigmund Freud and Jacques Lacan. And one of the major lessons of psychoanalysis is that desire cannot be stopped by prohibition, but desire is precisely born out of prohibition, right? So it's not that you desire for a chocolate and somebody is not allowing you to have the chocolate. It's precisely the other thing. It's precisely the prohibition that produces the desire. I'll just explain it to you in a bit what I mean by it. But the second point, which is a kind of a addition to it, is that desire is produced, therefore, as a lack. You desire that which you do not have. So say, for example, right now you are desiring for a packet of chocolate. It's precisely because you don't have the chocolate at your disposal at this moment. If you have a chocolate with you right now, then you will not desire the chocolate in the first place. You are precisely desiring cigarettes because cigarettes are unavailable at this moment. if you have cigarette with you, you will not desire it. So desire is born out of prohibition and not something which can be controlled by prohibition. This is also, it takes us around the conversations of law, desire, and all of it, which psychoanalysis engages with. But I'm just going to kind of break it down for you in simpler way by saying just this, that desire is therefore born out of a lack. It's born out of an emptiness, which is desired to be filled. Uh, and therefore, you will see that that which you prohibit is precisely that which will generate most desire. So say, for example, you are sitting in a room, I go into the room and keep a box and tell you that, you shouldn't open this box. And you can do anything in the room, but you can't open this box. You see, your obvious instinctual reaction would be to go and open that box, or at least the curiosity to know why am I forbidden to open this box? And this is the reason why that it's so pleasurable, it's so thrilling to read the inbox of other people, to read the letters of other people, which you're not allowed to read. So there's a lot of these things going on. Those of us who travel in the metro, we know that if you're typing something on your phone, the other person sitting next to you will just peep into the phone, almost perhaps enter into your phone to see what you are typing. Now, it's all of that stems from that uh, understanding that which you're prohibited to do, you're tempted to do the most. Which brings me to the final point, the third point about desire. And this is also coming from Lacan's seminar 11. And that is desire of the other. In the sense that you think that it's your desire, but it's actually the other person's desire. Now, this is a slightly difficult concept to understand. So I'll try to break it down for you. Say you are in love with someone. You are in absolutely fascination with you are absolutely fascinated with somebody. Hmm? You are so in love with the other person that you almost try to imitate that person. So my partner loves blue, so I also start wearing blue. My partner loves Chinese cuisine, so I'll also start developing a liking for Chinese cuisine. My partner is a Metallica fan, so I also start spending time on Metallica, even though I was a jazz person before. So you see, there are a lot of ways in which we try to imitate the other in our desires. So our desires are largely desires of the other person. It's seldom desire for ourselves. Uh, it's almost like, say, you have fallen in love with somebody, and that somebody tells you that, you know what, you are absolutely ugly, you are nasty, you can't speak, I hate you. You'll feel heartbroken. Why? Because that is not how you want to be perceived by the other person. You want to be perceived by the other person as something which is pleasurable to you. So the other is the foremost component of desire. And this is just one half of it. The other half of it is this, that as much as desire is of the other, or rather imitating the other, there is also a desire to be the other. So it's not just you are imitating your partner, but you're also attempting to be your partner, which is of course connected to the first point. So imitation translates into being, right? So you try to be the other person. And that's why the other person loves green, you start liking green. So you slowly try to become the other person. Uh, which kind of brings me to the next point about COVID-19. And that is, once this whole thing happened around February, when in India, COVID had not had this scale, but it was kind of, what should I say, telling that the porn sites or or X videos, Pornhub, all of these websites had so many of coronavirus videos out there. Hmm? And it's still there, by the way. You can go and have a look. and people wearing gears and having sex. This video is removed on the right hand side. MILF in coronavirus quarantine gets hot fucked for medicine. Today, when I was about to take a screenshot of it, I realized the video has been removed. So see, this is the other that I was talking about, that you slowly kind of uh, try to imitate the other person, and you'll just get to know why I'm saying this. Pornhub has also said that they're going to give free subscription to people. You can use the quarantine time watching free porn, and whatever revenue Pornhub generates, it will go to Italy. That was the last time I had checked. I don't know if they have had any other philanthropic declarations. Now, and you see, these are all examples like how mask for masks changed into mask for mask, and how the impact of corona entered into all these different forays of desire and forays of sexualities. Now, to come back to that point about being the other or becoming the other, one of the things about the coronavirus porn is that the two things that are being referred to here are fantasy and fetish. Now, if pornography is a genre that's driven by fantasy, if pornography is a genre that's driven by imagination, because see, that's what porn is, right? It's not that whatever we watch in porn, we do it in real, but there's some kind of a pleasure we derive just by watching those, which hardly any of those will try in reality. So the two things that are very significant or run concurrently to one another: fantasy and fetish. Now, what is fetish? This is from Freud's essay. uh, Fetishes are those in which the normal sexual object is replaced by another which bears some relation to it but is entirely unsuited to serve the normal sexual aim, which means that the fetish is something which is invested with the sexual, but it's not always something which comes in line with your pursuit of the normal sexual aim. So we know there are food fetishes, there are fur fetishes, there are different people have different kinds of fetishes. So here what we are noticing is that the virus has been rendered into a fetish. Hmm? The mask has been rendered into a fetish, or rather objects of fetishes. Hmm? Which kind of brings me to the fact that it's desire for the other and desire to become the other. Then are we hinting at the fact, or can we hint at the fact that the fetish for coronavirus porn is a desire to become the virus? Can we hint at the fact that the fantasy for coronavirus porn is a desire to imitate the virus? By which I mean that, I mean, what does it mean? Of course, humans cannot definitely become a virus, right? Unless you're thinking about Kafka's Metamorphosis. But what we can think about is that think about what the virus is doing. The virus is killing people. The virus is controlling our lives. The virus has regulated our existence. So can it then mean that the desire to become the virus is a desire to take back the control that we have lost, take back the power to regulate that we have lost? Hmm? Because that's precisely what the virus has done. The virus has taken power out of our hands, and the desire to be like the virus through the pornography or the pornographic videos is almost a desire to take back the power, to become the virus, fuck the other person, and take the power back. Hmm? So you become the virus to fuck the virus, right? So if you can frame it in that context or that way. And why I'm saying this is because of what, or rather how, Freud describes the fantasy, that the motive force of fantasies are unsatisfied wishes. Every single fantasy is a fulfillment of a wish, a correlation of unsatisfying reality. Sorry, there's a typo in the word reality. uh, I mean, I don't know, it's not a typo, it's a Freudian slip, I think. Now the thing is, you see how reality then is unsatisfying, and to render the reality back to satisfaction, you need some kind of a way to navigate it. And here the way almost becomes virus spawn so that you can become the virus to fuck the virus. So that's, I mean, this can be talked about endlessly, but I'm just going to leave it at there. If you have questions, we can address those. Which kind of brings me to the part about death drive. And this is an idea that's again coming from psychoanalysis. Freud is of the opinion that the eros, which is the pleasure principle, is always in opposition with the thanatos, which is the death drive. And remember, all our activities are divided, bad word, split between the erotic and the and the thanatos, right? So it's almost like one side of your psyche is pulling you towards the pleasure principle, the other side of your psyche is pulling you towards the death drive, right? Think of it like this. You have your exam tomorrow, you know you should study, but at the same time, you have an intense desire in you to watch a Netflix show. You know that cigarette is going to kill you. It comes with a big kind of disclaimer that smoking kills, but you still invest in cigarette and continue consuming it, right? That's a death drive. So you have your pleasure principle, which pulls you towards, let's say, the good things, although there's nothing good about pleasure, and we'll see it very soon, and the death drive, which will take you towards all the bad things. And I'm not kind of forging a morality schema here by saying good and bad, but just working examples, lack of better words. And the second point, and this is what I was saying, that why the pleasure principle is not necessarily always good, so to speak, because desire or pleasure is always entwined with death drive, right? And this is the example of the cigarette packet, that you buy a packet of cigarette and you consume it and you think that you have got a lot of satisfaction, but what it does is it's also kind of physically damages you. And therefore, the whole idea that I generate desire or I generate pleasure out of that very thing, which is physically damaging, which is self-destructive, is precisely what the concept of the death drive is. Now, to understand the death drive, I have the literary example for you, and this is so much true to our understanding of desire in general. And this is the prologue from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. I'm just going to take 5 more minutes, and just before that, quickly, couple of literary examples. This is just the prologue from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. And you know, Romeo and Juliet is the most iconic heterosexual romantic literary text that has ever existed. You have variations of it. You have variations of Romeo and Juliet in Punjabi literature, like Desire in General, in Laila Majnu, in Heer Ranjha. So you have all the different kind of permutations, combinations, and changes, and all of that. So this is just one prologue from the play, which I just want a couple of lines to read, but I'll just quickly go through it once. Two households, both alike in dignity in fair Verona, where we lay our scene, from ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. Just look at the paradox of these lines, right? Civil blood makes civil hands unclean, right? So if it's civil, if it's really that civil, so why is it making your hands unclean? If it's really that civil, why blood in the first place? From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, whose misadventure piteous overthrows doth with their death bury their parents' strife. So their parents started the strife, and now they are dying because of this. The fearful pass, and this is again a very crucial line, the fearful passage of their death-marked love, absolutely fantastic and fascinating, and the continuance of their parents' rage, which but their children's end not could remove, is now the 2 hours traffic of this stage. So to put it very crudely and simply, Romeo and Juliet is a tale of two families, the Montagues and the Capulets, who are arch rival, arch enemies. As you can see, the third line, ancient grudge break to new mutiny. And they have continued fight, continued struggle, continued hated each other. But despite that, Romeo from, I think Montague, Capulet forgot, falls in love with Juliet, right? So they kind of breach or transgress that arc mutiny, arc rivalness, arc enmity, and they rise above hate and fall in love with one another. But this is the brilliance of Shakespeare, that he tells that the love is already death marked, that the love is already paradoxical, right? Civil hands make civil bloods unclean is a paradoxical thing. So you know that you are going to end yourself or put your life at risk if you uh, fall in love with the other person, your enemy or your rival, but still you do that, right? So Romeo falling in love with Juliet is also Romeo falling in love with his enemy. Similarly, Juliet falling in love with Romeo is also Juliet falling in love with his enemy. So that is one of the central things about the death drive, that desire will always be death marked. You'll be prevented. You'll desire that which is prohibited. You will desire that which you have no control over. Uh, I just selected these two examples, but I think I'm going to skip them because we are running out of time. But just one thing I wanted to focus here is that disease is also dis-ease, something that will not let you be at ease. And the only thing that is not going to let you be at ease is desire. Oh, I'm assuming that many of you may have seen Ae Dil Hai Mushkil, and you know that the ending of that fantastic film is about Anushka falling. So Anushka has cancer, and Ranveer falls in love with Anushka even before she has had cancer, and that's an unreciprocated love. Now, what happens at the end is that Anushka is on a flight and she has gone. She has kind of trying to run away, and at that moment, Ranveer calls her and is like, "Come down! I have come for you to the airport all the way. How can you do this?" All kind of drama. And then Anushka pretends as if she's dying inside the flight and she escapes. Now, Ranveer doesn't know that she's pretending, right? So Ranveer is like crying and all of howling and all of that. And then Anushka opens the mask, the oxygen mask, and she's like, I have had cancer, so let's better put the disease to some good use. Which also is that fantastic commentary that how you can overcome the limitations of illness, how you can turn the illness around to, or rather in favor of desire. So as much as desire is diseased, as much as desire will put you in dis-ease, as in discomfort, in a unsettling moment, but you can also use the disease in the service of desire. The same goes with Normal Heart, and it's a fantastic film about the HIV/AIDS epidemic that broke abroad, and how, for example, and I'll just tell you about Normal Heart in the next slide, which is a slide on barebacking. And this is one of the culture which is very prevalent among queer communities, mostly in the West, but here also not so much in a collective way perhaps, but definitely out there, which is the culture of having unprotected sex. Unprotected sex not just with anybody, but an HIV positive person consensually will have sex with an HIV negative person. And the virus will be seen as a gift that will be given from the positive person to the negative person, right? So you see the extent to which the death drive goes. So you know that you're going to be infected by the virus as as deadly as HIV positive. As deadly as HIV, and you still go for it, right? So what happens here is a classic example of how the death drive plays, but also more than that, a classic example of how desire and disease commingle with one another, right? And the sense of community is built out of them. Absolutely, the last part where I have reached and is that is then, or rather, can we think of desire producing disease, as in the case of, or maybe, okay, let's put it in this way. Uh, does disease produce desire? So in the sense, now that you are stuck in the HIV, in the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic, is it then tempting you, making you horny, making you want sex, making you want to touch your partner, hug your partner, kiss your partner, whatever, making you search a partner in the first place? Or is desire produces disease in itself. As in the case we saw with the instance of barebacking, with the instance of HIV, with normal heart. The classic example for that is and I promise this is the last slide, desire in the two texts. One is Death in Venice, which I'll not go through, but I'll go through Devdas because I'm sure that many of you know the text, are familiar with the text, have heard of the text. The Devdas falls in love with Parvati, and Parvati rejects Devdas. The Devdas is like, now I'm going to drink and I'm going to die. So what is happening here? Is desire producing disease? Because remember, by the way, Devdas dies of tuberculosis in the film. In the novel, he dies of sexually transmitted diseases, which none of the films, none of the adaptations of Devdas show. So let's stick to the film. In the film, what happens? He falls in love, the love rejects him, he takes to alcohol, he dies. And he dies for, I don't know what, cirrhosis of liver, some people say tuberculosis because he's vomiting out blood, coughing, all of that. So what is happening? Is disease producing desire? Or is desire producing disease? Had Devdas, would Devdas still have taken to drinking if he had got Parvati? Or does he take to drinking because he did not get Parvati? So we see this is a classic chicken and egg question to which we do not have an answer to. Much like we do not have an answer to the previous one, is what does disease do to desire? How can disease regulate desire? How can desire be thought of as unsettling, disturbing? And this is the final one, which is we must be scared of the virus, but we must understand that desire is scarier. Desire is unnerving, it's unsettling. It will not let you be at one place. It will wage a war against you. It will make you wage a war against you, right? And if you ask me what is the way out of it, I would say that just free yourself in it. Just sail yourself in it and see where it takes you, right? That's the uncertainty of desire. That's the uncertainty of the times that we are in. And our only way perhaps is to deal with that uncertainty instead of trying to look for safeguards against it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rahul. I think for a lot of us who've been taught by you before, it was just going back to those classes and having as much fun. I think it was brilliant. And I don't know, whenever you get a chance to see the YouTube recording, you should also see the comments. People are clearly very happy to see you again in action. So because of paucity of time, I'm going to keep the questions quick. Of course, we will not be able to cover all the questions, but what I definitely promise to our viewers and people who have sent questions is that we will have Rahul answer them and we will collate them and send it across to you on an email for sure if we don't cover them here. So I think I'll first pick a question which came in the YouTube chats, and then I'll go with the pre-registered questions as well. So somebody wanted to know, I think Garima wanted to know if, because you've mentioned that desire is born out of a lack, right? So what she wants to understand is it always born out of a lack, or can it not be innately, within you? So if maybe you could help us with that.
Yeah, I think one of the things we need to think about while thinking about desire is that there is hardly any kind of innateness to it. There is hardly any kind of intrinsicness to it. So what we think of as innate is necessarily coming from someplace outside. Maybe it's coming from influences that we have been exposed to. Maybe it's coming from the way our family has trained us, the way our society has trained us, the way our schools and universities have trained us. So there is hardly anything intrinsic about or innate about desire or sexuality in the first place. And I think there's also a risk to think about it, about intrinsic and innateness. And that is the risk which people generally think or generally make with regard to queerness. That is, they pose the question, when did you first realize your sexuality? And you see, the moment the question is framed, the obvious implicit understanding is that your innate sexuality was heterosexual. And then at some point of time, you realize that you are also drifting the other way. So there is nothing intrinsic or innateness to desire.
Got it. Got it. Another question from Shivangi during the chat was, I think she is talking about three categories of people. Of course, sex workers, asexuals, aromantics, as well as people who are survivors of sexual abuse. So while I understand that these are, so she wants to understand what do you think, according to you, is their status in the times of lockdown? And of course, these are three different questions, but maybe if you can pick one and talk about it, and the rest we can address it over emails.
Yeah, I'll first address the question of the sexual abuse part, and I think that's a concern which is plaguing so many of us alongside the actual plague and the pandemic, because the home is always not the safe space for people, as we know. There have been a lot of there have been a lot of writings that are coming out on this. Also, how domestic abuse rate has increased during the lockdown. I would like to think of it in a slightly different way, and that is, I would like to think that let's take this moment, which is a moment at which or during which the rate of abuse has increased, to think that how can we use this moment to build or mobilize a collective. Because for me, what is absolutely crucial to questions of sexual abuse is that it's not a reality that just fixed at one given moment. The struggle is a continuum. And to address that struggle, I would like to think that let's utilize this moment to reflect and think that how can we mobilize against domestic violence? How can we mobilize against, build collectives against uh, sexual harassment or sexual assault. So that is just one part to it.
Sure.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yep.
No, I
Got
mean,
it.
I would love to write back to her on the other two, but I'm just concerned about that we are running out of time.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I promised, we will definitely get back to every single question. I have 3-4 more, I think, which we can address it for the broader audience as well. One is a very interesting one, personally speaking, I think, which is where the viewer asks, how do we communicate privacy in Indian homes where the whole family is locked down together? So
True. I mean, it's not just a question about communicating privacy, but I stay at a place where there's a slum which is very close to my house, and which can be seen from my roof, from the terrace of my house. So when I'm usually on the terrace these days, I can see that most people are not in the room, but outside the room, because they just have one room and say 4 or 5 family members. So they don't even have place to sleep inside the room, but they're sleeping outside. And that is, I think, one of the insensitivity of the lockdown in a country like India. Now, if you ask me what is the solution to it, I really don't know. But I think we need to consider the fact that in a country like India, where so many people do not even have the concept of privacy, concept of home, how effective method a lockdown can be.
Yep, that makes sense. Another question is, how do you think we can make these conversations simple, that it's easy for vulnerable communities to understand the complexity and urgency of the situation? And also, of course, the entire concept of desire also plays a key part there. So if you could maybe help us understand that.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have, I don't know, this will be somewhat of a shoddy answer at this moment, because it's the longer answer. But I would like to think that let's not assume that people don't understand the intricacies of desire. Let's not assume that only we who speak in English and have access to Zoom know desire. Because what is very significant for me is, I think, the most invaluable lessons about desire that I have received are from the sex workers, are from the trans hijra person who beg on the streets. So I would absolutely not like to think that there is no understanding. What we need to do, perhaps, and what is urgent and should be done, is to foster a conversation between the communities who can speak in English over Zoom and communities who do not have access to that.
Got it. Also, one of, again, Apurva on the YouTube comment section wants to know, what are your thoughts on this particular statement, which is the biggest problem with desire is that it's usually at odds with what's considered right.
I completely agree with it. And I would like to think of right, not just as in right and wrong, but
Mhm.
right also in the sense of its legality, as in
Yeah.
rights. And there is something about desire which will always transgress both right
Mhm.
as morality, right as legality. Because this is the first point that I was talking about when I was talking about prohibition, that desire is something which will definitely transgress
Yeah.
boundaries, transgress prohibitions. And if you think about rights in the legal sense, like for example, now you have 377 repealed in India and homosexuality is permissible. Now, we also then need to see that now that it's permissible, who does the law leave out now? So if
Hmm.
you have a Muslim homosexual and a Hindu homosexual, who will be prevalent and who will
Yeah.
be far more accepted than the other? So yeah, that's it.
Makes sense. Last question, I think, from the section, where I think one of the viewer wants to know how will we reconcile physical intimacy and desire with calls for self-isolation and the immense migration to a virtual landscape for all spheres of our life? So,
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is just a fantastic question because I think
yeah,
this is the moot point of it, that how do we deal with cope with social
yeah,
isolation? I think the answer is something that I tried to hint at when I was talking about the coronavirus spawn,
yeah,
and that is let your fantasies play out. Let your give a free rein to your fetishes, give a free rein to your imaginativeness. Because remember, sex is not just penetration, not just kissing, not just the commingling of two bodies. Sex is
yep.
much more than it. Intimacy is much more than it. We do not know at what moment, what shape it will take, but it can take just so many shapes. So, my only concern is that do not hold back your fantasies or fetishes out of any moral inhibition, but just as I ended the slide by saying, just sail yourself and see where you reach.
All right. Thank you so much, Rahul. I think some fantastic answers, some fantastic thoughts. Like I said, I'll repeat again to the people who we have not answered your questions to, we will definitely reach out to you with your answers. And once again, wherever you are, just clap your hands for Rahul, because I think this one has been in plans for quite a while. And because Rahul quickly agreed to do it, so we were able to kick it off. So once again, Rahul, we are really grateful. And to everybody, all the 100+ viewers, we are extremely grateful for you to, for you to be able to take your time out and attend the lecture series. We'll have more coming up. Please follow us on Instagram for more details. And if you have any questions, concerns, we are right here. So feel free to reach out. Thanks, Rahul.
Thank you very much
Yeah.
for bearing me. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just
Thanks.
parting words, Rahul. Thanks a lot again. And thanks for taking this first session. You should definitely go and check out the YouTube live comments. I'm sure you would at least have a nostalgic view of like taking your lectures. And again, just a parting thought, if you have any words of wisdom for our audiences, and this is one thing that I wanted to ask personally, what should be one's relationship with, say, masturbation at this point of time, and what is the excesses of it, uh, what should be one's relationship around that subject, if you could have a parting word on that.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't really have a wisdom. I can only share my thoughts. I
Yeah.
don't think I can give any wisdom. I think the part, I mean, in relation to your question on masturbation, I'll just share an anecdote and I'll perhaps that will address it. When Nikunj texted me that, would you like to give a talk on desire in Corona times? I was on the dining table with my mother and I was telling her that, oh, one of my ex-students just texted me saying that, would I be interested in giving a talk on desires in quarantine? And my mother said that, oh, but what's there to give a talk on this? I mean, you either masturbate or married people have sex. And I'm like, hello, it's not that simple. But
Yeah.
I'm actually glad that you brought it back to masturbation. And I think one's relationship to it's also relationship of autoeroticism. And we oftentimes think of masturbation actually as perhaps jerking off or somebody giving a hand job to himself or herself. It's not just, I think, about that, but I think masturbation can be of different ways. So even reading a porn magazine can be a way of masturbating. I mean, this is what I was telling Nikunj, that we don't know what forms masturbation will take. Somebody had asked me a question about asexuality, and I was thinking that how asexuality is not a space that is devoid of pleasure. That pleasure is perhaps located elsewhere, but there are moments of pleasure. So I think while masturbation is extremely crucial and important, uh, that it's not something which is very well defined. So there is no excess to it if it is not something very well defined. So the only thing I would tell people is masturbate as much as you want till you are saturated, and just don't do it if you don't feel like it.
Perfect. That's a wonderful note to leave our topic and discussion. And again, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to the viewers for joining in. We will be having our next session tomorrow with Professor Asim Srivastava, and hope to see you all there. And even if Rahul, you are free, then you could join as well.
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
absolutely.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.